Right standing with God.
A right standing with God. One person's listening. We're getting close. But now, a righteousness. Where does righteousness come from? God. From God. Apart from the law. Apart from the rules. Apart from the regulations. You see, this is the old way of thinking. That the law is the way that you come to get a right standing with God. And it's obvious why, right? Because everything you do on earth, you earn the right not to screw it up, right? If you go take a test this week, what does the teacher do when she gives it back to you? She marks which answers? The wrong answers. She doesn't mark the right answers. She marks the things you screwed up, right? Yeah. If you skip school and the principal calls you into the office, he doesn't talk about the days that you came and how good it was that you attended last week, right? What does he do? He talks about what you did wrong because you screwed it up. Later on, you'll all graduate. Hopefully you'll all go get jobs. When your boss calls you into the office, guess what he's not going to talk about? The days you came in and did what you're supposed to. He's going to tell you about what you're doing wrong if you get a special meeting into his office. That's because the way the world works and throughout the people you meet and everything you do in life, you will earn the right to be a good citizen in society. If you don't pay your taxes, the IRS will not, come in and talk about how many days you did pay your taxes and how it's okay because you did so many things right, they'll forgive you this time. No, they'll come after you because you screwed it up. So, what the scriptures are saying here, this is what's revolutionary, is that a right standing comes from where?
God.
From God, apart from the rules. Apart from all those rules you just mentioned, and any rules. Okay, stay with me, check it out. But now, righteousness from God, apart from the law, has been made known, to which the law of the prophets testify. Has anybody read the first half of this book? Anybody know what the first half is? Anybody?
The Old Testament.
Old Testament. The Old Testament is the laws and is the prophets. And they all testify. Everything that was written in the Old Testament comes up to this moment where Paul is explaining for the first time that right now, all of this stuff testifies that there would be a day that a righteousness, which is what? Would come from where? Apart from what?
The law. The rules.
Okay, verse 22. This righteousness from God came through faith. I want you to remember another word for faith. Another word for faith is trust. This righteousness from God came through faith, or what?
Trust.
In Jesus Christ. Everybody look at that word faith. Everybody look up at the word law. Faith and law is a direct contrast. The law is the old way of thinking. Faith, which is trust, is the new way of thinking. Follow with me, verse 22. The righteousness from God came through trust in Christ to all believers. Who does this righteousness available to?
All believers.
All believers. Is it available to people in North America?
Yes.
Is it available to people in South America?
Sometimes.
Is it available to people that are not the same color as you?
Yes.
Is it available to people who don't believe in the same things you do?
Sometimes.
Sometimes? Really? Follow with me. The righteousness from God came through faith in Jesus Christ to who? All. Not some. Not a few. All believers. There is no difference. Another way of saying there is no difference is there is no differentiators. I'll tell you a quick story. I had this friend of mine in college. In college, we lived in this crazy house. There was 6 guys in one house. It was nuts. At 1 hour or another, everybody was up, screaming, doing crazy things. At one point, there were 5 Christians in the house. 5. It was a good run. And there was one guy who wasn't a Christian. This man's name was Thomas. Thomas was a great friend of mine. You know what the bizarrest thing of the story is? It was not uncommon for Thomas to be a better Christian, despite the fact he had no faith, than the other 5 guys. We go out to eat at a restaurant. We're eating at Longhorn, true story. We all get done with our meal. We have a good time. We leave a huge mess because we're college guys and we're not very respectful. We get done eating. And it's time to tip. Guess what all the Christians want to do? Not tip. Short the lady. It's a single mom. Thomas pitches the Christians on how she works really hard and makes literally nothing. And that it's just money, and money's not really important. So he tips enough for everybody. And the Christians get up out of the table and leave. There are tons of stories about how good of a person Thomas was. In fact, better than the Christians. Now here's a contrast. Good friend of mine, a year and a half ago. He sat in this room in youth group when I was here. We'll call him Bob because I don't want to tell you his real name. I sat about a year and a half ago with Bob and I listened to what's going on in his life. He describes to me how he's been in a war in Iraq. He tells me about shooting people and the joy of shooting people in the head. He tells me about sitting for days and watching their body rot, and then when someone comes to get them, shooting them too, just in case. He tells me about marrying a girl in Iraq while he's married at home with children and not telling her. And then his wife calls. We're sitting in the car, true story. She tells him that she's thinking about committing suicide. She tells him she doesn't know what to do with the kids and her life's not worth living. My good friend Bob listens to the story, and I'm waiting to see something like Thomas would do. But you know what he tells her? He throws out some explicitive words that are some of those laws Christians don't do, and he tells her to go right ahead. He thinks she should commit suicide because her life is not worth living. That is a contrast. That is a difference between Bob and Thomas. Get with me back to 22. The righteousness from God through faith, trust in Jesus Christ is available to whom? There is no differentiator. There is no difference between Thomas and between Bob. Because all have sinned. What does it mean to sin?
Go against God.
To go against God. Practically, what does it mean to sin? Go against God is great. It's the right answer. It's also very churchy. You're telling your good friend, what do you do to sin? It is bad things, right? Just to simply do wrong. If you sin, you do wrong. For all have sinned. There's different degrees of sin, but we all have fallen short of God's standard. I can't even keep up with my own standard. How many of you literally think you can set standards for yourself and hit them all the time? Anybody? Anybody? I mean, this is not a sin thing, but me, I'm like, okay, 8 o'clock, I'm going to start studying. I cut the TV off, I'm going to start studying. 8:10, 8:10, 8:10, 8:10, I'm going to start. I'm going to cut the TV off. 8:30, dog. Here we go. 8:30, I cut the TV. I said 9, right? 9 o'clock, I'll cut it off. I can't even live up to my own standard, much less a standard of complete perfection. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Another way of saying glory is greatness. What's another way of saying glory?
Greatness.
What's another way of saying glory?
Greatness.
The greatness of God. You can reword this. You can say, for all have screwed up a right standing with God. And here's the thing about when you screw it up. You can't get it back. You see, because one screw up and you're done. In another lesson, we'll talk about growing your life in Christ. And I'll tell you a story about my life and some of the things that were influential in me growing a relationship. The growth systems that allowed me to know God better. And one of those stories is that I went to college and I played football for Georgia Southern. Now, it sounds great and exciting, but for me it was devastating because I wanted to wrestle. Gretchen could testify that in my freshman year in high school, I'm like, love, I'm going to leave somewhere, I'm going to go on a scholarship, and I'm going to wrestle somewhere in college. Except I didn't. I wouldn't play football because I wasn't good enough in wrestling. Anyway, my freshman year, football season, year 2000, Georgia Southern. We get down there, Division I AA.